والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطاهرين ما دام ما في السماوات والأرضين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم إنا نسألك علما ينفعنا ويرفعنا. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا واسعا وعملا متقبلا وشفاء من كل داء. وبعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, all thanks and praise due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His many blessings that He has bestowed upon us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in those blessings. Normally the verse we quote relating to the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reads, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ. Last night I found myself in a sitting. One of the students asked me about Ni'mat Allah. He brought it to my attention that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا, if you count. Now when we translate it as when you count the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the plural form. The Arabic wording says Ni'mat Allah, the blessing of Allah. So it refers to a single blessing. So he was pointing out to me that وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ, if you endeavor to count one blessing of Allah, لَا تُحْصُوهَا, you won't be able to encompass it. Because one blessing presupposes another blessing, which presupposes another blessing, which presupposes another blessing. So if we take an incident in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, then perhaps it will serve as a good example. MashaAllah, Habib, are you back from Palestine? Marhaba, marhaba, MashaAllah. Barakah. Remember us in your du'as, inshallah. Marhaba. Jameel. So there's a famous narration which you probably heard quite a number of times. The Prophet ﷺ made much of a very small blessing. One day he came home, he asked Aisha radiallahu anha, is there any spread for the bread? She said there's nothing but vinegar. So the Prophet ﷺ said, what an excellent spread. So making much of a small blessing. But if you look at that particular blessing, it's a blessing that presupposes so many other blessings. The fact that you have a spread, it's not dry bread. The fact that you're able to consume that which you have presupposes so many blessings. And perhaps not the most palatable example, but it certainly drives the point home of what is a seemingly insignificant blessing is really a great blessing. To have a regular bowel movement, that we're able to eat, we're able to digest, what the body needs, the body absorbs, what the body does not require, the body excretes, for lack of a better term. That itself is a blessing, and therefore when we relieve ourselves, when we come out, what do we say? Alhamdulillahi alladhi adhaba anni al-adawa wa afani. Perhaps if we consider the inability to be able to relieve ourselves, and then we will realize the nature of that particular blessing. So we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of His blessings, and we seek and we beseech Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in those blessings. We are on the 29th day. This is potentially the very last day of the month of Ramadan. I always make dua, no matter what the stats say. I'm good with 29 days. But people have different madhabs, no problem. If there's a 30-day brothers, I respect that also. But I'm a 29er. They say, that, according to the strong riwayah, the Prophet ﷺ, for most of the years that he fasted, all were 29 days except for one. One was 30 days. But there's a great degree of difference of opinion, because after that you'll find that the numbers differ drastically in terms of their opinions. Some would say no, 30 is more, but I go with the first riwayah. So, but inshallah, if we fast tomorrow, then alhamdulillah, that's a great blessing. And apparently the chances are that we're going to be fasting tomorrow, but let us not speculate. Let us wait, inshallah, for after Maghrib, inshallah, within this matter. So it is potentially our last day. May our last day be the best day. And if Allah graces us with another day, inshallah, we'll make the best of that. And it is certainly a gift and a treasure from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that particular regard. So we had started off with this leadership sort of paradigms, and we focused more on the paradigms, and we engaged with one leader, and we've looked at single incidences and tried to mine what value it has. We yesterday had spoken about leadership. One of the requirements of leadership is that you have knowledge. And Umar radiallahu anh, he was well endowed with knowledge. We said you need to have the trick in order to do the trick. You need to have knowledge. Now, that knowledge coupled with a proper methodology in terms of leadership, and that we also spoke about in terms of mashwara. That's why لا خاب من استخار ولا ندم من استشار. That person who makes istikhara, who asks Allah to decree for him what is good, لا خاب, you will never fail. ولا ندم من استشار. A person who consults and seeks mutual consultation, nadima, the most, whatever you think when you make a decision, you don't want to regret the decision, retrospectively. So prospectively, what should you do? You should make mashwara. Obviously, if you're wanting about a car and a mechanic, medicine, a doctor, and so forth. But the guarantee for you not to regret a decision, going forward, would be that you make mashwara. So Umar radiallahu anh, he had this, in terms of his individual capacity, he has great knowledge. On one occasion, the Prophet ﷺ, he saw a dream, and in that dream, he says, I was given a pail of milk, a goblet of milk, and I drank the milk, and the excess, that which remains, I gave to Umar radiallahu anh, and Umar drank thereof. So the companions asked the Prophet ﷺ, how did you interpret that particular dream? He said, I interpret the milk to be a metaphor to refer to knowledge. So you look at the knowledge of the Prophet ﷺ, and his knowledge was certainly great, was indeed vast. But for Umar to have a fair share of that particular knowledge, you can imagine what knowledge he had. But to complement that knowledge, he always used to make mashwara in terms of a leadership. And so that was sort of like a little bit of yesterday's discussion with one or two added details. I want to go on to the next issue, which was mentioned not only about Umar, but a few of the other companions. And then that is going to bring us to one incident. We're going to talk about that, inshallah, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we'll see what we can do for the balance of the time, inshallah, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This narration, it reads, عن قبيصة بن جابر, he said, والله ما رأيت أحدا أرأف برعيته ولا خيرا من أبي بكر الصديق. So he's going to look at the righteous caliphs, which the Prophet ﷺ spoke about. And he told us that we should follow the righteous caliphs in terms of their practices and so forth. So he comments about Abu Bakr and said, I didn't see anybody ar'af. Ra'uf means to be compassionate. I did not see anybody more compassionate with the word used again is ra'iyah, the flock. In other words, with those who he was responsible for, than Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. So this is also very important. And we spoke about, like, perhaps in a contemporary setting, when a list is made of leadership qualities that you need to have, you'd find more than often it's going to be that hard qualities. But we find that in terms of the righteous caliphs, that they had a balance of these qualities. Stern when required to be stern, but soft when required to be soft. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, that was his nature. Araf, he was very soft. But he had a connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what made him a good leader. And that's unique within an Islamic paradigm. When the Prophet ﷺ was on his deathbed, when the Prophet ﷺ was in his illness that would lead to his death, he needed to appoint somebody to lead the prayer. So he said Abu Bakr should lead the prayer. His daughter, al-Mu'mineen, the mother of the believers, Aisha, protested and said, no, that's not a good candidate, Abu Bakr. Why? Because Abu Bakr is very soft-hearted. And when he stands in front to lead the prayer, he is overcome and he starts to cry. Cries a lot. So then, but the Prophet ﷺ didn't take that counsel from Aisha radiallahu anh. He actually rebuked him and said that Abu Bakr is to lead the prayer. So despite the fact that he was very soft from this particular aspect, the Prophet ﷺ didn't consider him not to be leadership material. Because remember, in terms of our leadership, you have to have a connection with Allah. And because ultimately your leadership is an extension of obedience to Allah and His Messenger. So if you have a connection with Allah, then Allah will facilitate for your leadership and the fellowship and those issues which relate to it. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he was very, very soft in that particular regard. وَلَا خَيْرًا مِنْ أَبِي بَكْرِ الصِّدِّيقِ, and no better than Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. And we know that in terms of the order of excellence, in terms of creation, after the messengers and after the angels, this is now the four major angels. So the Prophet ﷺ is the most excellent of the creation of Allah. Then following the Prophet ﷺ are the messengers, and following them are the angels, but not all the angels. The foremost angels, Jibreel, Mikael, Israfil and Israel. After the angels comes Abu Bakr. So that was the station of Abu Bakr. So he says, لا خير منه. I haven't seen greater than Abu Bakr رضي الله عنه. ولم أرى أحدا أقرأ لكتاب الله ولا أفقه في دين الله ولا أقوم بحدود الله. And then he says, I've never seen anybody أقرأ لكتاب الله who would read the Quran more. So you can understand this in one of two ways. Qara'a means to recite, but terminology changes over time. So at the time of the companions, a Qari would be a reciter of the Quran, one who understands the Quran as well. But here, in terms of the context, you would be Aqra al-Kitabillah, and I was read the book of Allah a lot. So may Allah SWT make us from amongst those. We always pray like, Allahumma arhamna bil-Quran al-Azim waj'alna imaman warzuqna tilawat al-Qur'ani. Oh Allah, enable us to read the Quran ana al-layl wa atraf al-nahar, throughout the evening and throughout the day as well. In other words, a portion in the evening and a portion in the day. So he used to read the Quran a lot. وَلَا أَفْقَهَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ. And أفقه, fiqh, means to have an understanding. So one is to read Quran, and the other one is to have an understanding of Quran. So Qabisa, he says that I did not see anybody who read the Quran as much and who was more knowledgeable in terms of understanding, in terms of the religion of Allah, وَلَا أَقْوَمْ بِحُدِّ, and no one more firm in terms of establishing the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا أَهْيَبَ فِي صُدُورِ religion, and no one more feared, held in high esteem, with a greater order than Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So now, there's one incident that comes later, so I'm going to tie this particular narration with the incident which comes later. The Battle of Badr took place in the month of Ramadan. So we know the brief history behind the Battle of Badr. The Prophet ﷺ wanted to initially waylay the caravan of Abu Sufyan. And the Muslims set out to waylay the caravan, but the caravan ultimately eluded them. But when Abu Sufyan got news of the fact that the Muslims are going to waylay the caravan, hijack the caravan, in lieu of the wealth that they left behind in Mecca. So Abu Sufyan is traveling with the caravan. So, like tit for tat, our wealth was usurped from us in Mecca. So in lieu of that, we're going to take the wealth in the caravan. But Abu Sufyan then sent a message to Mecca, informing the people of Mecca that the Muslims are attempting to waylay the caravan. And then Abu Sufyan took an alternate route, and he managed to actually elude the Muslims, and the caravan was safe. And then he sent a message to tell them that the caravan is safe and there's no need to set out. But the leaders of Makkah were hell-bent on mustering an army and marching onto Medina. So it ended up that they marched and they came to the wells of Badr, and that's where they basically set up camp. And they were 1,000 strong, and the Muslims were basically 313 ill-equipped. Even psychologically, they had set out to waylay the caravan and not to have a full-fledged battle against the disbelievers. So ultimately, they ended up, and Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted them victory. And the victory was such that they had killed a number of the enemy, and also kingpins that, the leaders of the opposition really. And they'd also taken a number of prisoners. Now, in relation to the prisoners, what to do with the prisoners? So the Prophet ﷺ, he also consulted. And this is the important part in terms of, again, mutual consultation. The Prophet ﷺ, again, following through on a very important phenomenon of leadership, and that is to consult. وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. That experientially, I'm sure you've had this experience whereby you did your homework and you were sort of you were convinced that you need to take this decision, but then you thought even such as, by the way, let me just consult, man. And then you consulted, and then you made a completely different decision, and you told yourself, subhanallah, good thing I actually consulted. I was going to go for A, but actually B is a much better solution. So that's in terms of leadership. So the Prophet consulted. So the Prophet was of the opinion that the prisoners, will ransom them. Will ransom them. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, you saw now just a moment ago, ما رأيت أرأف. I didn't see one more compassionate than Abu Bakr. So Abu Bakr says also we can ransom them. And here also, in terms of what happened was some of the ransom was education. Some of the prisoners were lettered, and the ransom was they needed to teach the Muslims, letters basically. In other words, educate them, make them literate, such in our terminology. But nevertheless, Umar's opinion was no, that at this particular stage, in terms of our vulnerability as such, that we should the enemies, because there's such a thorn in our side, they should be put to the sword. That was Umar's opinion. But the decision was taken. And there's also another important thing of leadership and fellowship. Umar had an opinion. His opinion was sought, his counsel was sought. But the Prophet didn't take his opinion. How do they say in Afrikaans now? I don't know if this is going to sound right. Is it right? He didn't kick against the car. In other words, it doesn't sound right in English. Even my Afrikaans, it sounds so bad, sounds better than the English equivalent. In other words, he didn't rebel. He was constant, and that's important. It's because, we need to have, we now, Mizan Itikaf, now we have to have an Amir. Nobody wants to be the Amir before the Amir is appointed. Once the Amir is appointed, then everybody wants to be the Amir. And now when they're giving the rice, and my rice not taken, and then things don't, actually your rice was the right rice, because things didn't work out, and then it's not right for you to say you should have taken my rice. No, it's now we committed, there's the Amir, we follow through, and unless now it's something like really drastic, then you can pull the brakes, of course. But generally, no. So Umar, his view wasn't taken, and the prisoners were ransomed, as Allah would have it. So you see the uniqueness of Umar in that regard. But then Allah SWT revealed verses thereafter. And who does Allah SWT take to task? Allah SWT takes to task the Prophet and Abu Bakr, because that wasn't the correct decision. Good decision, but there was a better decision to be made. ما كان النبي أن يكون له أسرى حتى يثخن في الأرض. That they should have been put to the sword. So here now, in terms of leadership, we find another phenomenon, and perhaps we can talk about this, because sometimes, in terms of our own personalities, when we do an analysis of ourselves, of our own personality, of our own makeup, many times we have blameworthy qualities, but we project those blameworthy qualities as good qualities. We have qualities. It's in essence, in real terms, it's a blameworthy quality, but we project it as a good quality. I'm trying to think of an example. Okay. But it mustn't be an example that we're going to differ about, man. It must be one that we're going to agree about. So can we agree that if you stop at the robot, it's irresponsible to give money to the person asking you money? The alternative is that I don't know if they still have this, but you could have coupons. And there was a drive, I don't think the drive is any longer there, where you give the person a coupon, he must go into a certain soup kitchen, and then basically hands in the coupon, and that will basically be a first step in hopefully trying to reintegrate this person back into society. They're not going to take the coupon, because they're not really interested in being reintegrated back into society. But the responsible thing would be not to give the person money, because in all probability that money is going to go where you don't want it to go. So the responsible thing is maybe to give him a coupon, or maybe give him some kind as opposed to cash. So okay, so even if you don't agree, let's just say hypothetically that it is better for you not to give the person cash. Now, I believe firmly that it's irresponsible to give the person cash. It's irresponsible. That is just appeasing yourself in some way, making yourself feel better about yourself, but you're not helping. You're part of the problem, not the solution, if you really think about it. But anyways, so I catch you now. I'm driving behind you. And now you roll down the window and you give the guy some money. So I catch you. So I say, what are you doing? Irresponsible. You're part of the problem, not the solution. So what do you say? Man, I'm soft, man. I can't help it. But what you're actually telling me is I'm a very good person. And what is my quality that you've just witnessed now? It's my softness. So in that particular instance, softness is not a praiseworthy quality, it's a blameworthy quality. You with me? So many times, so let's take a step back even. We come to that one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks in the Holy Quran. Allah says, La tuzakku anfusakum. Don't, you can't mark your own exams. We know that. Somebody must mark the examination for you. But we mark our own exams. You say, nee, fair praat. Een ding. Ek wil nie van myself nou praat nie, maar een ding. So what happens is we mark our own exams. And this is not about, this is about personality. Like, are you honest? Yes, I'm honest. You mark your own exam. Allah says, don't mark your own exams. Allah knows best who has praiseworthy qualities. So that's the first step. Second step is, sometimes what happens is, there's a lesser quality within us, but we construct it, we construe it as a good quality. It happens, so I'll explain to you now about that. So that's the second point. Now, what is actually good qualities? And very simply, look to Allah who is the supreme being, right? And look at the qualities of Allah. Then look to the messenger and you look at his qualities. And if you want to develop your personality and you want to have the perfect personality, then look at Allah who is the supreme being and look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who on a human level would be considered to be the supreme being. So when we look at Allah, what do we find? Allah has 99 names which are not necessarily his qualities. The qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are different from the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The names of Allah stem from the qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in terms of our orientation when it comes to Islamic theology, we of mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has 20 qualities. But just to look at the names, because it makes it simpler to explain. Allah introduces himself. What does he say? Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. So Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, it basically comes from the same root letters. What does it refer to? So our scholars say, if you look at on a human level, what is Rahman? So our scholars say, صفة في القلب تقتضي التفضل والإحسان. It is a quality found within your heart that causes you to be benevolent and it causes you to do good to others. That's I say that be merciful to the dog. What is it? It's a quality in your heart that dictates, that necessitates that you be good to others. That is Rahman. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not merciful in that particular sense. Allah is merciful in the sense that He is benevolent. He blesses you, He grants you blessings, if you wanted to. Al-Mun'im. So now, subhanAllah, now you're getting an idea of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. And then He talks about merciful, especially merciful. Actually, the surah starts off like this. Bismillah, when you invoke the name of Allah, the first qualities that come to mind is Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. So subhanAllah, this is the impression you get of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now you continue in Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Malik is the owner. Ad-Din refers to the day of judgment. Day of judgment, scales of justice, everything is going to be placed. Now, what do you have now? Now you have the personality, so to say, quote unquote, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the conceptualization of it in your mind. He is not just all mercy, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also just at the same time. So it is a balance of qualities found within the Supreme Being. If you look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, exactly the same. He had the best of character. So he had basically all of these character traits within him. So you could possibly have potentially like dormant within you. You have all of those qualities. But a person, you will refer to him as having good character when he's able to bring the required character trait, depending on the circumstances, to the fore. That's a person with good character. So a person with good character is the requirement of the time, that to bring that particular required character trait to the fore. Somebody comes in and chivalry is the requirement. And chivalry, our scholars refines قوة كامنة تندفع لنصرة الحق. They say it's an internal quality that تندفع, that it is activated لنصرة الحق, in order to support the truth. So you see something wrong happening. So what you do is you turn a blind eye and go, were you in a position to actually do something about it without unnecessarily putting yourself at risk? So the quality is not to to look down and walk away. No, if you see somebody doing something funny, like itikaf, you go around, the person is maybe standing and urinating. So what do? There you don't make a big hoo-ha. You make almost like you didn't see it. وَإِذَا مَرُّوا بِاللَّغْوِ مَرُّوا كِرَامًا. And that would be praiseworthy. But now you see somebody breaking into one of the cars. And so what quality must come to the fore there? The quality of chivalry. So bringing the right quality to the fore that is required in the circumstances, that is good character. So you find that Prophet ﷺ sometimes, he was the best of character. So they talk about within his household. So the Prophet ﷺ had all of these exemplary, and most of the time when we expound on these qualities, we expound on the softer qualities. So the Prophet ﷺ had that. But at the same time also, Aisha radhiallahu anha said that when the call for prayer went off, and it was if he didn't know us. In other words, time for the family and time for Allah. So the whole idea of bringing the proper and necessary quality trait to the fore when the circumstances require it. So in the example that we gave now in terms of Badr, compassion wasn't the required character trait that needed to manifest itself, but rather it was a resolve in terms of establishing the believers. And many times, even if you do the modern charge, they say that if you have like if you're very soft, now we say softness is a very good thing, but actually on the psychological charts, when there's the excess of softness, it leads to indulgence, and then you're spoiling the child, or you're spoiling the congregation, or whatever the case may be. So one of the examples that we have of Umar radiallahu anh was that he had an exemplary character. He had all of these necessary character traits, and like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was able to bring the required character trait to the fore when it was required. He could be the softest of persons, but at the same time also he could be the most principled of. And it's very important when the requirement is there. And it's like a human condition in terms of character. Therefore Allah SWT, when he talks about the penal law, Islamic penal law, we know that penal law is a universal concept, everybody accepts it. Even in South Africa, secular law, you have to have some sort of penalty when people step out of line. The only difference what the modern mind would look at is the degree of what they would consider severity in terms of the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, people who maybe ask if you commit adultery or fornication, 100 lashes on the one side and stoned to death on the other side. The only question they're really asking is in terms of the severity of the punishment in general. There Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, don't let the wrong character trait come to fore thee as a leader. So Allah tells you explicitly, لا تأخذكم بما رأفة في دين الله إن كنتم تؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر. Let not compassion overcome you here. Because that compassion, might seem to like sort of benefit you, but in the long term, everybody's going to be harmed thereby. So لا تأخذكم بما رأفة في دين الله إن كنتم تؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر. So that's important. A good example came to my mind now, but it eludes me. Came in and went out. But inshallah. So this is the important lesson that we learn from Umar radiallahu anhu, to bring the right quality, the required character trait to the fore when it is required, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And I do think if I can use maybe myself as a major premise, that it's easy for us to reify the softer qualities, but sometimes those classical qualities which is considered as like manly virtues, sometimes there's a great degree of reluctance to us, knowing very well that at this point in time I actually must put my foot down, but somehow or the other we're reluctant to put our foot down, and we become very indulgent and tolerant in that particular regard, but the consequences are disastrous. So the example we learn from Umar very clearly is that particular knows best. Now, inshallah, I'm going to jump to the end and we see how the time goes. Oh, Adam is finished. Alhamdulillah. Yeah. Alhamdulillah. So now we're doing the last story, inshallah, and this also talks again to the leadership of Umar radiallahu anhu. And I'm sure you maybe have heard this story before, but it's really, really amazing in terms of Umar radiallahu anhu. Again, coming to the hadith which we started off with, and perhaps it's opportune for us to end on this particular hadith, because we started off with كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته. All of you are responsible for his flock. But before I go on, that concept is understood. The whole idea of your personality, and you have a lot of character traits, and to consider yourself as having good character would mean that you're able to bring the necessary, the required character trait to fore. Otherwise, we actually need to work on our personalities in terms of our character. Maybe we're too harsh when we're supposed to be a bit softer, and what comes to mind now would be Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. Umar radiallahu anhu appointed him as the governor of the Levant. Now, and he was known for a number of things, and one of the qualities he was known for was his clemency and his tact and his wisdom. So he gave like a metaphor in terms of, he says, when people, when they pull, then I slacken, and when they slacken, then I pull. So in other words, I always maintain this particular balance in terms of the relationships that I'm responsible for. So that's very, it's a good, I think, metaphor in terms of, when to be soft and when to be not hard, but when it's required that you be firm. So to be able to maintain that balance, and if you liken it to like a tug of war, when to pull and when to loosen, you must be able to maintain that balance in order just to keep that rope sort of like in equilibrium. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So Muawiyah is also another example in that particular regard in terms of managing. And then look at Umar's leadership as well. Umar was very AUSTERE person, right? And the throat that he used to wear, he was like had 4 patches on it and so forth. And he never used to, for example, if you go to the governors, and the governors even had a doorman, which means that the wali of Allah asks, how can I assist you? The other asks, I don't have much time. So some of the governors used to start having doormen to access, you can't see the Amir now. If Umar heard of that, the doorman loses his job and the Amir loses his job, governor also, because you are a civil servant, people need to have access to you. But now he comes to, and this is also Umar, he comes to Sham now, and Muawiyah is resplendent in very thawb like the people of the time. So Umar says to him, what is this? You dress like this. So then Muawiyah said to Umar, just hold on, here people only understand this language. In other words, if I were to dress like you dress, and then I would fall in the estimation of people. So for purpose of the da'wah, I need to present myself in a particular manner. And Umar radiallahu anh, he used to say later on that if you wanted to look at our Qaisar, like an emperor, then look to Muawiyah. Because he used to carry himself like in that particular regal way. But the environment actually dictated that, you need to, because remember that Damascus was run by the Roman civilization. And they were very developed as you compare to the Bedouin Arabs in terms of administration, the way they used to carry themselves. If you wanted to see it as I don't know how this works really, but they used to have like built-up toilets. It's only when the Muslims came to Damascus and then they saw the built-up toilets, and that's where the issue came, that when I relieve myself and I'm facing the Qibla, what happens then? Are you with me? So they were developed to that extent that everything was like built up and managed like in a particular way. So what lesson do we learn from there as well? That Umar radiallahu anh, he was strict and principled, but at the same time also he could listen to common sense and allow for that to happen, like he did in the case of Muawiyah. One size doesn't fit all. So even in terms of the governor, like another governor, Umar radiallahu anh, would send him packing. But Muawiyah, because he had a legitimate reason, and then Umar allowed that type of leadership. Allowed that type of leadership. Personally, a very worrying thing for me in terms of leadership is this totalitarian approach that we have to leadership. I'm in charge, and you must do it the way I say you must do it, finish, that's the end of story. As opposed to creating a type of leadership that is like sort of like engaging and creates freedom within which those you're responsible for can operate. And you'd find that with that type of attitude, you get much more out of your constituency than what you get from, I say like this and you must do it like that. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here we find Umar radiallahu anh, he wasn't saying, look here, my way or the highway. He actually could understand the circumstances in Sham and allow Muawiyah to employ a mode of leadership that he deemed fit and more effective in terms of his constituency, and how not one size fits all type of approach. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So the last, I think this is a very nice story to leave with, and talking about leadership paradigms. So one of the key things that comes through with Umar would be the idea of what we today dub as servant leadership, and this is one of those beautiful stories. It is narrated from Zayd ibn Aslam, from his father, and his father was basically the sort of like the personal aid of Umar. That Umar tafa laylatan, everybody was like sleeping, and then Umar used to go around like tawaf, like around Medina. It reminds me of the story of Imam Abu Hanifa. Abu Hanifa is sitting late at night and looking at certain things. So what happened was his daughter said, everybody's sleeping, why didn't you also go sleep? So Imam Abu Hanifa responded, now Imam Abu Hanifa is an imam. His daughter is telling him, having pity on him, So, it reminds me of Manata also. He used to be like, if there was a pressing issue within the community, it wasn't uncommon for him to spend the whole night looking for an answer, because a fatwa, a decree needed to be issued in order so that people can get their answers and they can go on with their lives. It wasn't uncommon. So Imam Abu Hanifa told him, why didn't you sleep? Everybody else is sleeping. So Imam Abu Hanifa said that they're sleeping because they know Abu Hanifa is awake. They're sleeping because they know Imam Abu Hanifa is awake. There's an ajib thing, for the ulama, people wake up all also. Umar radiallahu anh, tawafa laylatan. Everybody sleeping, but Umar is making tawaf of Medina. Now he's the leader now. So in this type of leader, the management and you just oversee things. There's a place for that, I do think, but also there's a time when you must, I can say, put your shoulder to the wheel as well. طاف ليلة فإذا هو بامرأة في جوف دار لها وحولها صبيان يبكون. he came across a lady, and she was in a home, and the children around her were all crying. فإذا تدرون على النار قد ملأتها ماء. Because I'm not going to read all of the Arabic, inshallah. I'll just relate the story to you. So then this lady, kids around her, kids are crying, and then there's a fire, and there's a pot on the fire. So what happens is Umar radiallahu anh said to her, "Oh, Amat Allah, oh, slave of Allah, why are the kids crying?" So she said, "They're crying because they haven't had anything to eat." So then Umar says, "But what's on the stove?" So she says, "No, it's just a pot, and I put water in the pot so that I can lull them to sleep. So they, sort of like relax, like, I don't know if this happens in your homes, but when the meal is not ready yet, they put the dastakhan on, and they put the crockery on, and after a while they put the glass on to lull you into the idea that, look here, the meal's not ready, but it's coming, and then you also start relaxing a bit." So she put the water and boiling the water so that she can lull them into sleep, but actually there's no food. So then what happened was Umar radiallahu anh, so Umar sat and he started crying. These are the condition of the people. And then he says he came to the Baytul Mal and he took a sack and he filled the sack with some flour, some ghee, and some fat. The Arabs, they love fat. It's a standalone meal on its own. I can warn you before the time, just now in case you get worried. We went to Damascus, and then the neighbors, if you get a new neighbor now, what do you give them? A housewarming. So you make a cake and you send it to them. So we came there to Ruknuddin, and we got us a place. So the neighbors next door gave us a housewarming. They gave us a blob of fat, a blob of just fat. So I said, "What do we do with this?" I said, "No, that is a delicacy here. You must eat it. That's why the Arab shawarma tastes so nice, because this is more, it's got that flavor, but it's healthy." They like it so much that some of the children, they give them the name Shaham. Shaham means the fat. So they love it so much that they give the name Shaham to some of the what's name. So Umar took some fat. Shaham, there's a word in the hadith, Shaham, takes it, Shaham, tamar and some clothing and so forth. He folded and then he said to Aslam, "Oh Aslam, put it on my back." So then Aslam said, "Ya Amir al-Mu'min, ana ahmilu ank. I'm going to carry it for you." So he said to La umma laka ya Aslam. It was almost like a type of a curse, man. La umma laka. May you have no mother. What say you? Jamal. Azilika. La umma laka min azilika. Ya Aslam. Ana ahmiluhu. I'm going to carry it. Why? لأني أنا المسؤول عنهم في الآخرة. Because I'm going to be asked about them. I'm responsible for them in the Akhirah. So now, if I'm responsible for them in the Akhirah, how can I say, that you must carry it? So it talks a lot about what we like to do. I also do it sometimes, what do you call that, man? You subcontract all your work. You do nothing yourself. Everybody does it and everything. So that's fine, I think, in certain instances. But in other instances, when it's your responsibility and this type of leadership that we have, the Prophet ﷺ, what happened was, in the trench, the Prophet was with them digging. They were hungry so much, they lifted up the shepherd with one rock. The Prophet lifted up his garment and there were 2 rocks tied to his tummy. This is when we show this type of exemplary leadership, inshallah things will change. فَحَمَلَهُ عَلَىٰ أُنُقِي حَتَّى أَتَى بِي مَنْزِلَهُ. So Umar came and then he sat and he prepared the entire meal. So after he prepared the entire meal, he fed them. And then after he fed them, they now ate to their fill, and then he started playing with them. And he made like he was like a wild animal and played with hunching onto the shoes and so forth until the kids were laughing and giggling and so forth. When it was time to leave, so he said to his aide, "Why I stayed behind to play with the kids?" He said, "Why did you do that?" He said, "Because it pleased me that when I came, they were crying, and I wanted to leave them in a state where they were happy and they were laughing." Mullah Khalil, a few years ago, he gave us a beautiful hadith of Ayyul A'mali Afdal. Which action is the best of actions? So the Prophet ﷺ says, "Idkhalu surur ala qalbi akhik," that to bring gladness and happiness to the heart of somebody. So, every day we had that opportunity. But I think sometimes we squander the opportunities. You can go home and bring gladness to your wife's heart, for example, or just saying something nice, or, a smiley face. That's all they really want. But you, I don't know what's wrong with you. Yeah. And there's a few tricks, and I think men, I don't know if we all wired the same, but you got to orientate yourself sometimes, because the opportunity gets missed also. Same Nazim, if you go home and now you go in the house, that first 1, 2, 3 minutes is so very important, not even at the first 30 seconds. And then you don't have to watch him, but if you orientate yourself, I'm going home now, I must smile, I must sadaqah, this, that, and the other, then everything falls down. But now you come home, you don't have any of that when you come, and then after a minute you realize, look, I can must be different, but the moment is gone. I don't know if you experienced that. It's like completely gone. Now, no matter what you do now, you can go buy the flowers now, it's not the same. You just have to come home. Even sometimes when you come home, you have a legitimate reason. I used to do it sometimes when I'm conscious enough and I do it, but Allah make us conscious. Even to rush home whilst you need to go to the loo, man. Go to the loo somewhere else. And so when you come home, you can give your attention to it, and they just need 2, 3 minutes. Everybody is rushing out. And if you record it, you find it's like so crazy. Everybody is running, mashallah. Your wife is happy to see Shahid, Hafiz Shahid, and the kids are all excited. But you like this party pooper, you like, it is like this down there. Has it ever happened to you? It's like such an anticlimax. Everybody's so excited to see you, and then you just spoil the moment like that. So Idkhalu Surur, Umar radiallahu anh, he saw them crying, he wanted to see them, laughing and happy. So this is the ontology, the mode of being of a leader. And you are the leader of your home. So this is how we should, conduct ourselves. So may Allah give us the tawfiq in terms of these beautiful lessons that we've, just read from Umar radiallahu anh, and that exemplary leadership that he displayed, subhanallah, on all facets. He was really this holistic and really this giant, subhanallah. And may Allah give us the tawfiq to follow their way, inshallah, the way of the Prophet ﷺ and the way of the Khulafa al-Rashidin. And Jazakumullahu khairan for the opportunity to be able to sit with your honorable selves and do this program. To be very honest, I was doing my best to dodge it. But I made a fatal mistake, man. See, Mullah Khalil contacted me, right? So I blue ticked him. So what happened was, he said, he interpreted that as no answer is a yes. No, this is a yes. So we'll see it now. But next year we'll have to see how we. No. But subhanAllah, always a great pleasure to come to the Mizan institution and interact with the students and benefit from the goodness and spirituality. May Allah accept your itikaf. May Allah make it a means of you gaining closeness to Him. And all of those benefits which Allah has kept in the Ramadan, particularly in the last 10 days, Allah SWT grant you all of that. May you leave your itikaf like the day that your mother gave birth to you, free of all sins. Now, and that promise of the Prophet ﷺ, Man qama Ramadan imanan wa ihtisaban ghufira lahu ma taqaddama min dhanbihi wa ma ta'akhkhar. And Laylatul Qadr is about ma taqaddama wa ma ta'akhkhar. That if you get the night of power, and then all of your sins are forgiven, the previous sins and sins yet to come, in terms of that particular hadith. So may Allah SWT grant you all of that. But most importantly, the closeness that you have experienced in itikaf and in the month of Ramadan, hold on to that, treasure it, be wary of losing it, and there can be no greater punishment than after experiencing closeness to Allah to be distant from Allah. Now we've come into the itikaf and we've experienced some of that ecstasy in terms of gaining some closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is hold on to that. Addu alayha bin nawajid, grab onto it with your molars, hold on to it. Because that is what will avail you in this world as well as in the hereafter. May Allah put khair in barakah. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.